And it says we're live. I'm gonna guess it's live. I'm not sure. Let me post this. Sorry if I'm late. You know how it is with work. You know it. You know the man. Anyways, you know it. Let's talk about something that I've been recently experiencing. And I think a lot of us just take it for granted, but we actually forget that it affects us. It affects us as gamers. It also affects the video game industry. Is how hard it is to actually write a video game story. Because in me rewriting, the script of Call of Duty Ghost, even though I've actually done it here in the channel, but that's just like giving you general scenarios. It's not properly fit for every action that the player might do. Because one of the things that you have to consider is you can actually say, oh, well, we had um, let's put it in a simple way. You haven't let's take in a first person shooter, Halo or Call of Duty. You got to destroy something. Okay? In the meantime of destroying something, even though you can script more enemies or something happens, you gotta take into account how the player is gonna actually do it, and because you can write it like the player can do this, the player can do that, and everything, like several scenarios, and that would actually transfer into the programmer, and the programmer has to actually fit all those scenarios, in the final product for us to actually do it. That's why when we play stories, we tend to play it in a certain way over and over again. Different. Like, let's say in GoldenEye, you can choose weapons and everything. Hey, but the player can just cruise everything with just melee, or can destroy things with a melee attack, and you're like, like Halo, like, oh, we need to destroy the Scarab, and instead of doing it the proper way, boarding it, defeating the shield, and then destroy the generator with either bullets or plasma rifles. You can grab a launcher and just boom, or grab a scorpion, destroy the back of it, and boom. Like actually, you have to actually write this. Is like, in order for the programmer to understand the freedom that the player has. How is that so? Well, there's certain games. For example, I think the one that everybody had least fond memory was an example of Call of Duty World War II. It was so linear in the campaign. If you wanted to go explore something else, you couldn't. It was like, no, you got to go over here. I think the level that I wanted to explore more, and I couldn't, was the one that you play as a French spy. That she was infiltrating one of the offices of the SS that they had over there. I think it was in Paris. I can't recall the city, but you infiltrated, and it was an office, and I was like, damn, I wanted to explore. There must be Easter eggs. You couldn't explore freely. Everything was linear, even to the point is like, oh, you gotta ask this person, and then this person is activated. But if you wanted to change the order how you ask persons, it's like, there's a certain way, and you're like, well, fuck me, and I have no freedom to explore. well, Black Ops 4, we know that there's no campaign. But for example, in multiplayer, there were certain places in Infinite Warfare like you couldn't explore and or do some activity. For example, I think it was the city that had a like invisible, but you can in any map you can get on top of vehicles, and you're like, then why the vehicle is there? Or there were certain ledges that you could actually climb with your boosters, but you couldn't. You know, so why is the ledge there if if I can get over there? And where there's certain roofs so low that you can reach them with a jetpack, and they're just to mantle and get over it. You couldn't. You're like, the hell. Um, that's on side of multiplayer, but more so on a campaign. When you restrict players to playing a certain way, and it has to be also written because you have to actually have proof. Hey, me as a writer, I wrote the player can do this, 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 and this certain level to achieve this. The programmer didn't put it in. You know, almost like saying, well, it's a programmer's fault. Or maybe it's just like, hey, the programmer did it, but the executive said, no, let's cut out the fun. An example of it is when in games like MMORPGs and like Skyrim, Fable, obviously, the one that comes into mind when doing this is actually GTA and Red Dead Redemption. If you actually can see, many people have dialogues, and even though it's like one-liners or just let's say it's a writer, programmer, someone that has just one line like "get off me" or "what are you looking at," and those types of games, you have to script it. It's like, well, if a player does this action, it's like I have to write it down. It's like, oh, if the player does this, I have to write this. In order for the programmer, when he does it, we can add in just a filtered voice because you need a script. For example, if you recall GTA 5, how it was made, it took years, and even the voice actor said it was too much. It was like 100, 200, 300 pages that they had to memorize. Sometimes it was just 50 pages, but you had to memorize it for the next day in order for you to actually put it on camera. And even though it was film, capture motion, almost like a movie, but that's just a cutscene. You gotta remember that between cutscenes, it's player movement, it's player action. So even though you can program it, but if it's not scripted, like, oh, the player is free to move and do this to complete this objective. He can complete it like this, and this. Because we see the programmers tell us that, but that's actually coming from the writer. It's just a programmer telling you, "Hey, we added this from the script," but he's not telling you that it's written. It's just showcased. It's one of those things that, for example, on writing is like the interactions you can have is like dialogue thing, um, different dialogues that you can have, and I think the game that represents it more is actually Mass Effect, the trilogy, not Andromeda. Andromeda is a piece of garbage. We all know that. So if you look at it, player action, how it interacts, and then the different types of dialogues that it must have. If you unlock everything. Let's say you're Max Paragon, Max Renegade actually, Renegade or Paragade. I go Paragade sometimes. Um, but with that, it's like, oh, I need to write dialogue for this character. I need to tell what it does if it triggers the cutscene. If he arrives to some like, let's say Shepard arrives with guns. I think you can do it in Mass Effect yeah, Mass Effect 1, you could go to certain places, activate your guns, and everybody would become like, oh, if the player becomes violent, the NPCs respond like this. Or certain characters would tell, hey, a piece of dialogue, like say, hey, lower your weapon or we're not in trouble. Or they get hostile because you got hostile on their asses. Just like that. So what do we do with this? How do we can circumvent this? Well, for example, you get a general description in order for the programmer to understand what you're trying to do. You know, this is where co-working can actually take you. You're writing the script and you're like, hey, I'm writing this and I need you to tell me if you can program this. Even though nowadays it's almost pretty much possible, but it has to be green lighted from above. You know, it's like, hey, you go to boss and it's like, I'm writing this in this story. If the character does this action, he's gonna do this. And if it's green lighted by above, you go to the programmer and like, hey, it's like it's green lighted here. It's like, oh well, I can't program it because of the engine we're running doesn't allow me, or it will actually make it go into overdrive and it will bug. You know, even though he can do it and like say, sure, I can do it, but the end result can work into what happened with Cyberpunk. You know, that causing an action just bugs the game or it completely freezes it, and you're like, what the hell? So you have to take it out. You have to change certain factors. If it's like in the middle of the story, like side quests, maybe it doesn't matter that much more unless it's those side quests are related to the main story. Then it's crucial for it to work, or you have to change the whole thing in order for you to actually, because you have to write the script, because then you can pass it on to the voice actors. Voice actors can understand what is going on, even though lately we saw it with Resident Resident Evil 8, you know, Resident Evil Village. We saw it with Cyberpunk 77 that sometimes they were not telling the actors what game it is until they already done a few lines. And those few lines that they did, some made it into the final product. Um, Maggie in her interviews, uh, the Duke, um, Nicole Tom Nicole that plays Daniela Dimitrescu, they all tell you, hey, even the voice actor for V, the female and the male one, is like, well, it's like we had our lines, and some of them were in the game, and but we didn't knew it was this game until like later on in the project, and then you want to redo those lines, but sometimes they don't let you. So that kind of messes up. So if they know from what franchise or what video game or what is it about the video game, not just like a general, give them a little bit more specifics in order for them to understand and get in it. You know, um, I think in their interviews that Jennifer Hale and Mark Meir for Mass Effect, you know, the voice actors for Shepard, they have they have told the interviewers, "Hey, I would have loved to make redo some lines or rewritten better lines." James C. Burns himself has said it's like there's so many lines that I would have redone it once I've seen the final product in order for me to actually get it better. You know, more context, more so like link the games of Black Ops, and you were like, yeah, it sounds good, but sometimes it's like, oh man, I missed my shot. But you don't know sometimes. Like you can do the same line over and over again in different contexts, but sometimes the the ones in charge of the project can pick the lines and just like this one gets with this one, and that's how we're going to do it because it in a certain context. But sometimes it just doesn't match. You know, I think more prominently is in the RPG games. Even though I played the bad one, of Dragon Age Origins. But for example, if you hit certain dialogues, you can actually hear the voice actor like trying to, like, for example, if they're unpleased or mad at you, sometimes it seems a little bit over the top or just too less tone, even though they say that I'm really mad at you. But either they exaggerate it or they just downplay it too much that it doesn't fit the character, and you're like, the fuck am I? What the fuck is this? The fuck am I playing? That kind of stuff. So I think it's important. It's like if you're giving them a certain line of dialogue, it's like, okay, we're gonna read this, like this sequence of numbers of dialogue, and you can have them highlighted in different colors, or give them the script, like, oh, you're gonna read this, and it has this variance, so highlight them in certain colors in order for you to, because it's different options, not only in dialogue but also in action. So, for example, you do a certain action while you're playing, certain it triggers certain dialogues. Uh, I think it's in. If it's not Mass Effect, it's in. I can't recall it was a game, but it was one of them shooters that you did an action differently. For example, instead of shoot that guy with his weapon, like, no, you do it with a different one. It's like, oh, and it triggers a certain type of dialogue. And you're like, what? That must be scripted. It's not only just programming. It's just like, hey, if you did, like, for example, instead of sniping a guy, obviously with a sniper rifle, you shoot him long distance with a fucking pistol. You're like, oh well, you're a cowboy. Instead of a great shot, I don't know, Ramirez. No, that would have been, uh, like, oh well, it's an Easter egg, or you do certain action, and you're like, oh man, Black Ops 2 had it. Talking about Call of Duty, since the channel is from Call of Duty, uh, certain ways that you finish the missions. It's written. Oh, if the player burns Harper's face, oh well, there's certain dialogue that triggers. If it's not burned, then the character does a certain action. Like Salazar when you go to, I think it's a Oasis. When they go to the fucking expensive island with the 1%, it's like he goes with his face burn, and it's like Salazar tells him, with that face, I don't think that any chick is going to talk to you. Or if his face is not burned, he just turns around, but he doesn't say anything. But those dialogues that are triggered, that are written by the writer itself of the script, and then it's put in, motion capture, or just, well, now this is motion capture. Back in the day, we didn't consider it that it was program. That's one thing. And actually, you have to script it like, if the player has done something from the beginning or middle of the game, it actually affects. So you have to take into account all those variables. Let's say, think for example, back again to Mass Effect. If you've been playing Renegade until half of the game, and then you try to go Paragon, is like, well, there's certain types of downloads like, oh, this sudden, like, 180 change, even though it's video games, but it's your playthrough. It's not a movie, Disney, that a 180 for no reason. It's not a video game, it's a movie. You gotta put why a 180. It's like, oh, super spy is like, there's no background of it that you were a super spy. So, anyways, in video games, while we play through, we can do a 180 because we're playing as a character if it's allowed. If it's not, it's like, well, certain actions and they reflect. Yeah, and it reflects our personality, even though it reflects also the personality of the character that you're playing. I think it was it was best described as in Knackman when he was reviewing Resident Evil Village. We were playing as a character. We are not the character. So on certain games, certain actions are going to be, you know, linear, but there are others that can you can do certain variables with the character and it would still be in line with the character. You know? It's like you gotta destroy that. Um if your character is like, um let's cut the bullshit and let's do this, you can kill him through a snipe or getting close and personal and just either with a knife or a melee attack. Um Shoot him in, in the head with sniper rifle or, rocket launcher and just like, yeah, get done with it. You know, it can trigger certain different dialogues, but it will still be in line with your character. You know, and you have to actually put it in order for the programmer to actually have it into account. Obviously, it has to be green lighted from a headquarters, but still, it's very important because then you can see it says a lot about you that you have the freedom to actually have, well, you have creativity, but you actually give the player the freedom to actually do whatever he wants. Once he has done it, you're like, oh, this is a good game, or maybe it's a bad game, but I can do however I want, and it's instead of being like bad, it's almost like mediocre in a sense of way because they we as gamers give points for actually allowing us to do shit in games. Um, I think in a sense of way that you can say it, Borderlands games, you can kill the bosses however you want, and it's like even though it's a good game, but for example, 3, it was like, uh, I'm going back to play Borderlands 2. See you. Um, it was another shitty game. Um, yeah, I can't recall. I can't recall shitty games because I I tend to stay away from them. So, but anyway, and that's a quick random stream. But I told everybody that I was doing this stream on Wednesday. It was a little bit short, but it's actually very difficult. One of the things that I would give advice if you're trying to write one of these is actually to sit down, write the general scenario, like where's your character, what's the situation, what's the possibilities that it might have. At least give 3 possibilities that they can make like a ramification of it. You know, let's say he's in the library and he has to check the certain books, and he's trying to look for it. But even though he has to look for the books, you can put, oh well, he cannot do it linear. He's just like, oh, if he finds this book, he has to next find this information, and even though he checks which book is first, uh, it can be like you need 3 ingredients. It doesn't matter which order you get them. It's the like it triggers the next cutscene that it's actually scripted and linear, or it can trigger the cutscene that chooses dialogue or certain actions. and that would actually like, oh, well, I can do this action, and then I can go back and do this action, or go even further. In the beginning, like choosing. The RPG games are actually they have amazing writers to actually, if you change certain dialogues, and I hope that we can get these games better because, oh man, we have, I don't know what it is, but we're starting to have a bad batch of games like we had through 2015 till 2018. 3 years of batch games, batch, a bad batch of games that were just like mediocre from down. There were a few games that you could say, "Oh well, this is an 8, this is a 9." Um, I think we got no. Last of Us was in 2015, but still, um, The Last of Us Part One, that was a very good game, and you could play it even though it has certain scripted things, but you were like, man, certain actions did certain things, and then like, that's actually good. Um, Red Dead Redemption 2, that one was like, even though it has a progressive story, but you can actually say, well, I would like to play this game like a different way, even though you get all the guns, but for example, different interactions that you can have in different towns, and they can remember what you've done. It's like, oh, well, I can go old bad guy, or I can go old good guy, or I can just be, kind of in the middle. And you would be like, oh man, it's a good game because different interactions, different things that even though it's programmed, but it was actually put in the script. So yeah, for my advice, it's like put in the scenario, give at least a minimum of three choices that they can do. They can start with, and it would affect. It would ramificate into different things that it can be achieved. Sometimes they can collide. If you do, let's say number two option, and then from that, two options appear, and the number two action is almost like the same if you chose uh, number three, but with the number one option, but it has a different way of, similar but not equal. It has like, oh well, I want to destroy this, but instead of destroying it, um, like America, I want to destroy it tactically. Infiltrate, put explosives, and then instead of just like an airstrike and boom, or a heavy attack. And even though it resembles somewhat the middle option with number two, sequence of option, you're like, well, it does. So that's actually one thing. Um, One thing that you have to remember is it all has to make sense. When doing this, it all has to make sense of how your characters do those options. If you choose one option and then change it, let's say you do a renegade option and then you try to change it to paragon, and you're like, but it doesn't make sense. It's like, well, I can add this line that it's not like for you to choose. And it's like, well, I thought about it, and it's like, or considering the situation, it's not possible. Uh, it's no other way. You can actually see it um, on the Dragon Age and Mass Effect games. Those are the ones that I've played for options, but still, it's a very good example for people that are writing stories, even for first person shooters, because even if it's just shooting bad guys, but there's different things you can put in, like different paths. It's like, oh well, you're in another building and you have to get out. Does it matter how you get out? You have to get out. So you can program, oh well, he goes into the elevator shaft and he repels down, or he gets into the elevator and goes up and then jumps from it, or from the same level he goes into a window, jumps and parachutes, or you take the stairs. Does it matter how you get out? It's like, no, you have to get out. Just give the player options, scripted in there, so the programmer can actually say, hey, if you escape like this, like let's say you're escaping the building, parachuting now. Oh well, it triggers a certain type of scenario, like, oh well, like a news flash, like, oh, somebody is or the criminal escaped through a parachute and they're trying to figure out his face, but he was wearing a mask, or you're not wearing a mask, and it's like, oh, your face is in it, so your character, the one that you used to escape, cannot go outside because he's going to get recognized. So it triggers certain type of events that now it has to produce to regain. That's one thing. We know that in Halo, you can eliminate foes however you want, um, and it doesn't affect the script because it is suspected from a Spartan. You know, there's certain type of actions that doesn't affect the story, and that's okay because it's in line with the character. Spartans in Halo are know how to infiltrate. They know how to go guns blazing. They know a lot of stuff. They're like almost like they're super soldiers because they can do everything special forces can do. Stealth operations, or heavy assault ones, or just regular battle, that kind of stuff. And it's in line with the character. And it's almost like, oh well, we actually know about it, so let's just keep going at it. And if you look at it, it's like it makes perfect sense. Oh, you can, let's say you got oh, another one, for example, Doom Guy. Does it matter how he does it? It's like, oh, you need to activate the tower. He could just blow it to pieces, or just grab the cables and just rip them off, or destroy the control panel and sell it, and the control tower is destroyed, and you're like, that's it. And you're like, well, it's scripted in various ways, but the end result is in line with the character of of how he does it doesn't matter because it's in line with the character. That those kinds of scripts, they can help a lot for beginners because it's in line with the character. If if he has several ways to do it because he's he doesn't approach the thing with one method, it's perfectly fine. Um, let's say let's say you manage a team of characters, and each one is specialized in everything. It's reflected more so on one mission in Mass Effect 3 when you're on Rannoch. It's not the Reaper base, it's more so the side mission of rescuing General Cora. That if you don't bring um, a tech member of your team, let's say Vega, you put in charge Vega of disabling the tower, and instead of using tech, what he does is just smashes the computer in pieces, and you're like, and that deactivates it. It's like, well, it is in line with the character. It's like, oh, I'm not tech savvy, so I'm just going to destroy this thing in order to deactivate it. you had to deactivate the tower. Didn't matter how it was deactivated. If it was through doing it like that, like no, your teammate doesn't know tech, so it's in line with him. That kind of stuff, and that actually pumps out interesting dialogue. It's like, oh, I don't know how to do this, so I'll just do this. Oh, tower is deactivated. Like, good job. Even though it's in line for you to bring or to put tally to deactivated the towers or somebody else in your team that is tech savvy, and you're like, oh well, yeah, because they know tech, they use tech as their up in their upgrades in order for them to uh, combat baddies. So there's not much change. That can sparkle dialogue, but that's just a bit more advanced. I mean, you can actually try it. Just make the script and just like, oh well, if I put the brute to read some books and he's like, oh, I'm having a very hard time. But let's take that example. Let's say you put the brawl no brains to research something. He's not gonna know shit. But let's say he goes into a school of nerds, kidnaps 2 or 3 nerds, and puts them to read, to investigate. And you're like, well, that script, the writer thought about it like, oh well, if a player does that, I can put like this idea, and you can get like 2 or 3 NPCs to the story, helping the cause or helping the character to move to a certain part of the story, and those NPCs are or they are disposed after they completed that task, or they can be, you know, if you have a sequel, those characters can actually remember your character and your other character that kidnapped, the brawl one, and that actually can help because it's like, oh well, you're making connections, and that connection can actually help enrich the story. It's like, oh man, yeah, like the creators of the game, even though it's writers and programmers, but if the players can do this, it's like you have to put it in. Um, just like recently in Black Ops Cold War, certain actions can reflect in the story, even though it doesn't change it that much, but it's actually reflected somewhat in the ending. For example, I think the best example is the mission when you're in the Kremlin. Um, it doesn't matter how you get the key; you have to get the key in order for you to actually go downstairs and retrieve Adler and Bell. And there's several ways. You can go and poison the general. You can uh, go and get a key reprogram, or you can go and say, hey, I got no key. I need to blame the general, and then take his key and get it. Or even if you choose to, like, oh well, it's like, oh, all keys, like, oh well, don't disrupt the keys because we can see who accesses it and everything. You're like, oh well, you know it helps. Another one is when Bell is having the hallucinations. If you stray from the paths, Adler is gonna say, "Oh yes, you did that," and then it's like, "Yes, Bell, you killed yourself," and then how you know it triggers dialogue, even though it's a shooter game, but having you in some levels give you the freedom. It actually works. Uh, Going more back further, it's if you guys recall the um, the ghillie suit mission, Call of Duty Black Ops 4, when you're playing as Lieutenant Price, you have to go. Obviously, there's a part where you have to, hide under the trucks, crawling and then going out and just uh, stay hidden. But before that part, even though it's somewhat linear, but the way that you approach the church, the way you approach the house, um, certain parts of the level, even though uh, you could do it stealthily, but it was also scripted that you could do it loud. You know, even though you have silenced weapons, but you could kill your first target and then grab their weapons, and you could go, loud on the next foes. I remember this because there was a part in the mission before the trucks where you were in junk area and you had to kill certain guys. I was failed to kill certain guys without the other guys noticing. Like you had to kill two dudes while the other ones are not noticing, and that's actually a very good script because it says, "Oh, if the other AIs notice that you killed two AIs, if their team is like they're gonna open fire at you, or they're gonna become alert and start hiding, and when they see you, they open fire. You're like, oh shit, but that's actually a good script." It was actually a thought that the writers did, and it's like, oh well, it's not just the programmer thought about it. I mean, he can have his input in it, but still, if you look on it, it's like, oh, what's written there? So we had to put it in. Or sometimes the executive says no, but that's that's when we start to see, developers and the executives getting on a fist fight in a certain way. Not literally, but figuratively. Well, sometimes literally in certain cases, but you know how it is. You hit your boss, you're out. So, for as much as you have the reason, but anyways, even though it's a short stream per se, I hope this has actually helped you realize how hard it is, even for top level ones. Because even though they have been doing it, if it is like a new franchise, let's say BioWare goes to a different direction, you know, and instead of making a Mass Effect game, they take all of that system that they had of choosing dialogues, creating your own character. Um, Instead of like Dragon Age, let's say it's I don't know, uh, a somewhat fictional steampunk 19th century where you choose certain dialogues. Your character can do shit and certain adventures, all that kind of stuff. So they have to write the characters. That's one of the first things. Write your write your characters, and then when you progress the story, write the story. You could say linear, but then you start to see which options can actually happen during the playthrough of the character. For example, if the character is stubborn, there's only one chance of dialogue. But for example, if he's with his teammates, the teammates can actually put like input on it, and then uh, even though your main character could be stubborn, he's like, well, you're making him things like, wait a minute, so you're saying I can do this? And like, yeah, it's just you have to do this, and it's like, and you can put it an option of asking, and it would trigger some more dialogue, or say, no, we're doing it this way, and it ends in a different thing. And even though it's in line with your character, it's like, well, the other option could grant you more options, and your character can evolve through through the choices of the player, and actually creates better dialogue. And you can actually see the evolution of that character not only through player option but also through the story. And if it's a sequel, you can see that progression tied with your character, because they can take the data of all the choices that you made in the first one, input it in the second one, and then you can continue it, or you can change it. You know, it's up to the creator and then the programmer for actually to do that. But hey, it's just a few ideas to just start, um, and for actually to make conscious uh, choices in when you're actually writing things like this, because it ain't easy. And I'm really and I'm really seeing that rewriting code. It's not just that simple as like a linear story. Once you put it on script, you got to take into account that players' choices. What are you giving the player choice to do? Certain types of dialogues and everything. So, anyways, I hope this has helped, and like, subscribe if you like content. Saturday, we're gonna talk about what's up with Warzone, because it's coming. It's coming. Anyways, Saturday, 2 p.m. Central. Don't forget about it. We're going to discuss about the future of Warzone. And until then, stay safe.